Hello YouTube. If you guessed this video is about axles, you'd be right. What we're going to do is strip down everything that's on the outside, trying to save everything that's on the outside. And we're going to take these things back outside and degrease and power wash again. They're pretty clean now, but they need to be cleaner. This one particularly. This is the front pumpkin, and it is still greasy. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is take everything off. Let's start with something simple like the lug nuts. Even though we're not going to use this, I'm going to label it just in case. So this is the left front brake hose. Next thing I want to do is remove the brake lines. And we'll save the banjo bolt and the copper washers, but we won't reuse them. Let's get the other side. I missed this when I soaked this stuff up. That's the bleeder screw. Let's see if this bleeder screw will move. Look at that, amazing. Let's remove the caliper sliders. And there's two. They're not rusted and they still have grease on them. That's a good thing. Let's pull the caliper off. I left the shock bolts on when I took this apart. We'll take them off now. These crimp clamps are tough to save. But I do have the, oh, how about that? Well, next I'd like to loosen up these adjusters and take the tie rod off, because we'll paint that separate from the differential. But there is quite a bit of gunk on these bolts. I'll never get a wrench on there if I tried right now. Let's see if this little impact will break this loose. After pulling the cotter pin out of the nut that holds the tie rod end in, now we can take it off. And we can separate the tie rod end from the spindle. I've tried a little bit of everything to try to get this tie rod end off of this tie rod. Can't do it. The crimp is loose, but it does not turn. I don't care what I do, it just not turn. So I'm resorting to heat. Let's see if we can move it now. I don't know which way you're supposed to turn it, but let's go this way. Oh, look at that. There we go, finally. I bet that's hot. We'll take the anti-rattle clip off. And remove the shoes, remove the pads, shows you how old I am. And take the clips off and bag them. We'll put a plug on our vent line so that when we go wash it, we don't get water into the differential. And now this differential is stripped down to the point where we're going to wash it again. Are these nuts going to be friendly? I think we're going to have to put heat on them. There we go. I'd like to save these lines because the aftermarkets don't come with the springs on. And if I can get them off, I can clean them up. Oh, the line's rusted on. And we can take this line off.
Oh, this hole.
It's the only other brush I got.
You can actually read the stuff on this thing.
Yep.
It's crazy.
This thing is, how old is this? This is an 82. So 92, 202,
2020.
12, it's 30,
40.
it's 40 years old.
This thing's older than me. I'm 40 this year.
You gotta get close. You gotta be about that far away. Yeah. These are all the tools that I found that I needed to complete the meat of the job, which is what we're gonna do now. Off comes the hub. This just slides off. Little paper towel to clean the snap ring off so you can see the holes in the snap ring right there on the top. Out comes the snap ring. Now we can slide this off. There's a big old nut in there and there's a washer behind it, and what they do is they bend up the edge of the washer to keep the nuts from spinning. So what we have to do is flatten this part of the washer that's bent up. With the washer flattened, we want to take this nut out, and I can't tell you the size of the nut because the socket I'm using is not really a nut, but it happens to fit and it's doing the job. So we take the nut off. Then behind that is the washer that we flattened out to get the nut out, and it has a little tab on it that slides into the axle to keep it from turning. Now we have another nut, and this one's not very tight because it's just holding the bearings in. And there's another washer behind that nut. Now the whole rotor assembly will slide off, and when you keep your thumb over the opening so the bearing doesn't come out of the rotor. Next comes the 6 bolts holding the dust shield in. They're lock nuts so they don't come out all that easy. They make a special tool that threads onto this, so you use a slide hammer to get this out. I don't have one. What I do have is an old wood chisel that's got kind of a bevel on it, and we'll just try to separate it. Well, it took me a while, but I got it. No damage. Then comes the stub axle spindle seal, and it's all cracked, and the other one's all cracked. So we'll get new ones of those. And now the axle comes out. Next comes the ball joints. Let me get these cotter pins out. This is the easy one. Now the lower nut. This socket just fits in there. Let's see if we can break this loose. There we go. This is the turn limiter nut. And they used to have 33-inch tall tires on here, and the turning radius was limited to, you wouldn't believe how long it took to turn this Jeep around. So with the smaller tires on there, it's gonna have a shorter turning radius when I adjust this. As I've come this far, I'm gonna replace ball joints. And normally what you do is just put a nut on here and that would preserve the threads. But we don't have to do that because we're gonna replace the ball joint. And this is how you get it off. One spindle. We have the axle stripped now except for the yoke, but the oil is still sealed in the pinion gear by the yoke. It's not sealed in anymore because the axles are pulled out. I will drain the oil, but we're ready to clean this axle up and paint it. I've kept everything in order, and I've bagged and tagged all the parts, and they're in the order that they came off the vehicle. Here are the tools I use to disassemble the rear axle. This cap just comes off. There we go. Cotter pin's broke on the axle. How about that? We'll have to take care of that. Next thing is the Phillips screws that are holding the drum in. Last person that was in here did me a favor. They put anti-seize on these bolts. A lot of people complain about the previous owners. Whoever had this Jeep took pretty good care of it. I haven't really found anything that I would say was bad. Actually, the wiring for the lights, the auxiliary lights that were put on, I didn't like that. Now we have to get the drum off. There we go. If I was outside, I'd take a hose to this, but I'm not. I don't really like to use air because you don't know what's in the brake pads. It could be asbestos, but I don't think so. This looks pretty much like a Ford rear end. We're just disassembling, so I'm not going to worry too much about telling you where the springs go. We'll worry about that when we put it back together. We'll pull out the retaining pins. Actually, they're called nails. Now we should be able to just pull the shoes out except for the emergency brake. So this is going to kind of fall apart here. There's the self-adjuster that just fell out and on the floor. Now we'll take the shoe down with the emergency brake cable on. We'll pull the spring back and take the cable off. This is a neat little tool. What it does is it slides down the emergency brake cable onto the clips that hold it in place and push them together, and then you can pull the cable out. Get the wheel cylinder out past the axle end. You have to take the bleeder screw out. And then you got to take the two bolts out that hold the wheel cylinder in. And that's on the back side of the backing plate. And now we can take the wheel cylinder out, and I'll put the bolts and the bleeder screw right back in it after I pick it up off the floor. Now to get the axle out, there's 4 retaining bolts in back of the axle that are through bolted to the back side of the backing plate, and we have to remove those. Out it comes. And here we're doing the final ultimate cleanup. Yes, sir. Once again, we're preparing to paint. We're wiping it down with a little paint thinner. We'll blow it off with some air. Same deal, 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of finish. This is after degreasing, sandblasting, 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of finish. We got axle housing that I think is very acceptable, and we'll have to work on the others, and we have parts that we have to do for this axle. Taking a little break from cleaning differentials, we are sorting bolts out and putting them back in the bags. And the only way we can do that is if we look at the pictures, and there's only a few bags, as you can see, but we look at the pictures and match the bolts up with the bags in the pictures. This is what it looks like when they're all sorted out. We'll get these bagged and stapled to a board for easy viewing and searching, and then we'll get back to the differentials. And this is what it looks like when they're all stapled to the board. Now we'll get back to the differential. Judging from the color of the oil dripping out of the differential, I would say this oil is contaminated with water. I hope the gears are in good shape. I worked a long time to get these bolts loose. They're all loose now. It took a lot of heat, a lot of work to make sure that I didn't snap them off. But man, I'll tell you, what a job. Okay. Will the cover come off? Yep. Ooh, is that gooey and brown? First glance at the gears, they look okay. That's what contaminated oil looks like. Okay, let's pick it up and take it outside and do the final cleanup. Well, what a night to pick on this. It's snowing out now. And here we go. I guess, in a way, we're still cleaning. This is paint thinner, and I'm trying to clean off anything, any residues, anything that I missed. But I'm not coming across anything. It looks like we got it pretty good. Okay, now we gotta let that thoroughly dry. You guessed it, 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of top coat, several minutes apart, and then we'll be done. Well, that was the final coat. The light helps me to see any dry spots. I think I got a pretty good coat on it. With the axle housings painted, it's time to remove the ball joints from the spindles. I wish it was that easy, but it's not. But it's not difficult either. What you need is a ball joint press. And I went through all my shims in order to find the correct shims in order to do this job. And what I'm using is sockets and press fixtures that I had laying around. And let's see if this ball joint's going to be friendly. Now this will only come out so far because it's only so deep. Well, it came right out. There's one ball joint. And let's see if this bottom one wants to be as friendly. There we go. All right, so we got the ball joints out of the spindles. Let's go clean them up. I want to install the ball joints before we paint. And I want to do that so we don't mar the paint. And they say that it pays to put these things in the freezer before you try to install them, that it'll shrink it down just a little bit, and that you should heat the spindle up, and that means the spindle expands and the ball joint contracts. I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, I went through all my adapters and I found the right adapter to put on the ball joint, but my ball joint press doesn't have enough throw in it to put a spacer in at the bottom here so the ball joint can fully seat. So what I'm going to have to do is do this in 2 steps. I'm going to push the ball joint into the pocket as far as I can, and that'll give me enough throw on the ball joint press to, I keep forgetting to put it in the vise so you're not fighting the spindle while you're putting this together. Now let's try this. And now the spindle doesn't move, and I can put this plate in. With everything lined up and the gun set to tighten, not loosen, we'll push this ball joint in as far as it'll go. And with the spacer in here now so that the ball joint can come up above the spindle, we'll press it the rest of the way in. And that's it. I have it just set in there. It's kind of balancing. And we'll put our adapter on the top. Again, I don't have enough throw, so I can't do it in one pass. Let's push it in as far as we can get it. And that's it. Now we have to put a spacer on this side for the ball joint to come the rest of the way through. There we go. We'll check to make sure it's seated. Nope, not quite. It's almost there, but it's not quite down. And let's see if we can get it the last 1/16 of an inch. There we go, it's perfect. With the ball joints installed, the next thing is to paint. And what we have to do is tape off our brand new ball joints. We might as well tape up these studs also and just keep the paint off the threads. I will rethread them anyway. You guessed it, 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of top coat. Well, that's the final coat. Now we got to let it sit for 48 hours. Here are the 2 axle housings. The rear axle housing is freshly painted, and the front axle housing is about 4 days now. And if you look real close, you can tell that the sheen on the front axle has dulled down from what the rear axle looks like, which is great. It really matches the frame real nice. And now, with the spindles and the caliper brackets and the dust shields painted up for both sides, we're going to move on to the rear axle. More importantly, the backing plate. The engineers should be shot for this design. They designed it so that the hole in the backing plate is smaller than the bearing on the axle. And the bearing on the axle is maintained by a pressed-on ring. The way you get this axle off is you have to cut this pressure ring. In order to cut the pressure ring, you have to cut the axle so that you can get to the pressure ring without cutting the axle. And it's a pain because the backing plate is right there. So, and this bearing is fine. I'm going to leave it alone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean it up, and then I'm going to tape the whole thing, everything, except for the backing plate, and then I'm going to sandblast the backing plate. What I've done to keep this on the side that it came out is I labeled it left side. we're going to lose that label. So what I've done is taken a piece of wire and put a loop through the one that's on the left side. Anything that comes from the left side, I'm going to put a loop of wire on it like that, and that way the left side is identified. And I did the same thing on the frame. I put a loop of wire on the left side so that it's a reminder as how I'm doing this. My plan is to wash out this bearing, get all the grease out of it, so that if I do get sand in there, I can blow it out with an air gun. There is a seal that goes right here that keeps all the fluid from the differential from getting to the bearing. So this is a packed grease bearing, and then from here out the axle is immersed in oil. When we're done refinishing the backing plate, we'll repack this bearing, but it's going to be easier to tape it up with no grease there. And like I said, I want to be able to blow any sand out of it if I was to get some sand in there. There's no seal on this side. Like I said, the seal's on this side, but there is a gasket on this side. So I'm just going to be careful. I don't want to ruin the gasket because I don't want to take this axle seal out. And I don't know why they have a seal there, because there is a seal here. So let's start with a little paint thinner. Okay. That bearing is completely clean now. You guessed it, 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of finish. And that's the final coat on the backing plates, and we should be able to assemble the rear axle sometime on Saturday evening or Sunday morning. Parts pile for these axles is dwindling. We have to clean these up, and we have the same problem with the bearings. The grease will attract all the sand. So we're going to take the bearings and the seals out, and we'll wash the hubs out so there is no grease there, so that when it comes out of sandblasting, we can wash the hubs out again to make sure there's no sand, and we can go for it. And I forgot to order seals. So we're going to try to get these seals out and be able to reuse them. And just try a little bit at a time here and see if we can ease it out without damaging the rubber. Oh, it moved. Well, here it comes. It's almost there. It's out. And the rubber is fine. Fortunately, we don't have to go outside this time. These parts are small enough to fit into the sandblaster, and we can do it in the comfort of the inside temperature because it is snowing out once again. Yeah, more paint. But we're almost done with the paint. The title did say something about paint. Well, I think the only thing left really is the calipers, and I think I'll spare you the painting of the calipers. We'll just go right to assembly. We're so close to starting assembly I can taste it. The first thing we have to do before we start to assemble is to remove the rags that I stuffed in the axle to keep the sand from getting in there. And then I took a brake line and bent an end in there. And what I'm going to do is put this in the tube like so, all the way down, and I'm going to blow air back towards the opening here, twisting the brake line to get any sand out that might have got in there. Now this is noisy, so you may want to plug your ears. I'll tone it down, but here we go. Okay, I got some gunk out of there, but I think it was just oil. Here, look at this stick. But that's not sand. Now we're ready to take the cover off for the last time. No sand in there. I think this is the last thing we have to clean. I have it tilted at an angle so all the stuff falls out of the differential. After this, I think we start to clean things up. The cover is already clean. And this is pretty clean. The only problem is the gaskets haven't come. I'm putting the differential cover on without a gasket and just finger tight because the name of the game now is cleanliness. We want to keep everything clean. And I don't have the gasket, I don't have the oil anyway. I'm not going to let that stop me. We're going to continue on, and when I get the gasket and oil, I can come back and put them in. This is the final rinse out of the sand in the hubs here. What we have here is all the hardware that we took off the axles. It's been cleaned, tumbled, powder coated the tops of the bolts, and re-threaded. They're ready to go back into the axles, and we've turned the corner and we're going to start assembling. The first thing we want to do is replace this upper ball joint split ring seat. And I don't have the special tool for it, but you can tap it out with a punch and you can tap it in with a punch. So we have it out. We'll take the one that's supplied by Moog, put a little anti-seize on it, and screw the new one in. Now the manual says to start with the nut flush with the top of the yoke of the axle. So we'll screw it down until we got it flush. Okay, that's flush. Next we put our upper boot on and we slide the spindle into the yoke and get it up far enough to get the nut started. Now we're not going to torque this all the way up, we're just going to pull it up so that the bottom joint is stuck in the yoke so that we can tighten that nut. Okay, we'll go there, and now we'll put this lower nut on, little anti-seize. Now they want this torqued to 80 foot-pounds. Unfortunately, I don't have a socket that fits in there that'll go on the end of my torque wrench. What I do have is a 1 1/4 inch wrench that fits beautifully over this nut, and we're just going to tighten it until we think we got 80 foot-pounds. Okay, I'd say that's 80 foot-pounds. Now we have to take this top nut back off. They want this split ring tightened to 50 foot-pounds. And I'm just going to tap it in until I can't turn it anymore. I'd say that's 50 foot-pounds. And now we note the position of the hole for the cotter pin. Put the nut on. They want that to 100 foot-pounds. Okay, that's 100 foot-pounds. And you never loosen, but the hole's not lined up. We got to go about a half a flat. Now we'll stick the caliper bracket on. Tighten it up. Okay, caliper bracket's on. Axles next. Now remember our guide rule here. I've said it once before. Everything is clean and lubricated. Before we forget it, we'll install the grease fitting in the lower ball joint. Let's grease up the seal surface, and we'll grease up the spline, and we'll slide it in. Now we're only going to slide it in part way, and remember there's a seal in the differential. We don't want to pop that out, so don't go slamming it in. Just kind of slide it in and get it in the seal, like so. There's 3 seals that slide on the end of the axle. The first one is this one, and there's a fat side and a thin side. The thin side goes out and it slides over the axle, and it's a little bit of a struggle to get it on. We want to put some grease in there. And then there's a plastic seal that goes on. There's a bevel on it. The bevel goes in. Grease up the seal surface. And then there's a little rubber gasket, and the bevel goes out on that. And now we can slide the axle all the way in. There's a trunnion bearing in this stub axle, and we want to pack that with grease. And take your time, do it. Good job, it's important. Put grease on the surface of the trunnion bearing where it's going to run. And slide our axle stub on. There we go. We got it all the way down. And run these down. They want 30 foot-pounds on these. That sounds like 30 foot-pounds to me. Grease is the name of the game. We'll take a glob of grease and put it in here. And we'll put some grease on the race. We want to pack these bearings. And this is a bearing packer. And I like it a lot because you can actually see the grease come through the bearing. And you can hear it too. And this is what it looks like when it's done. All that grease is pushed up through the bearing, and we drop that into our rotor. We need to tap the seal into place. Okay. Set the rotor up in place without getting grease on the surface of the rotor. There, slide it onto the seal. Okay, now we got to pack the outer bearing the same way we pack the inner bearing, and slide that in place. There's 2 tab rings and 2 nuts. The thick tab ring goes in first and slides into the groove on the stub shaft. And then we put the nut in, and I didn't believe this, but this thing gets tightened to 50 foot-pounds, and that's against the bearings, and backed off 1 flat. There. 50 foot-pounds. Then back off 1 flat. Okay. Now we put the thin washer in next, and then the nut on top of that, and that gets tightened to 50 foot-pounds. Now we have to bend that sleeve up around the nut so that the nut won't come undone. So this is the tab we're trying to bend up against the nut. And I found prying it like that gets it up. We'll stick some grease into this hub. There's no provision for the lock ring on this hub. I'm surprised. But I took it apart. You can't put the lock ring on this hub. I don't know why. But there should be a lock ring that goes on right here. Put the gasket on. I put a little grease there. And I stick the gasket on so it'll stay in place. And we'll zip them home. And we'll grease up the inside of the hub and slide the hub on. Oh, we gotta unlock it. Slide the hub on. See, I can paint a different color. I don't paint everything black. Just about everything. Alright, now what I do to put these boots in is I put a little grease on them and just shove them in. And get it all the way in, just like that. Put some grease on the slider. Slide that in. We'll put a little anti-seize on the areas where the shoes slide. To start the calipers, the first thing you do is put the anti-rattle clips on. There's one. Now we can set the pads in. Okay, now we can put the caliper on. Okay, now we put the anti-rattle clips in place. We'll put the adjuster sleeve on. Put the bolt through and put the nut on it. And then we'll screw in our tie rod end. With the boots on the idle, we go to the inner on this side and put a nut on it. And we'll draw them up. Put cotter pins in. The next step on this axle will be the pinion seal, but I'm not doing that now. Now we're going to go on to the rear axle and assemble it. This is the bearing that we washed out all the grease on so that we couldn't get any sand in it, and then we washed it out with water. Now we have to repack it with grease. What I have is a needle on the end of a grease gun, and we're going to stick it right down in the bearing, and my son is going to pump the grease gun, and we'll actually see the grease come up through the bearing. There we go. And we'll do each roller that way. Well, this worked out well. I really like this.
Yeah, that's the point of a grease needle, isn't it?
I've never had one.
You've never had a grease needle?
No.
I sold those for years. You never bought one?
Oh, come on.
I'm going.
Why isn't it going in?
I can't tell you that one.
Wait a minute. All right. Try it again. All right. There we go. Okay, we're good. With the bearing packed on the axle, we want to put some grease on where the seal is going to run. And we want to put some grease on the spline. Then we want to put some grease on the seal here and on the area where the bearing goes in. It's not really a race because the race is on the bearing. We'll slide the axle in, supporting the axle so it doesn't run on the seal. And get it into the differential. Rotate the retaining ring so that it is in the right position. And put the backing plate in the right position. That's 4 that's tight. All the retaining ring bolts are now tight. We'll put the wheel cylinder in next, and remember you got to take the bleeder screw out in order to make it fit in there. Put a dab of anti-seize on the end of the bolt. We'll tighten down the bolts and put the little cap on the bleeder screw. We'll stick the ends into the wheel cylinders. In goes the emergency brake cable. And this is the passenger side, so it gets the long one, like so. Put the back shoe on with the emergency brake cable attached to the emergency brake cable lever, like so. And now this is going to go up in here. And stick the nail in. I've pulled the emergency brake cable and put a vice grip on it so that the lever is pulled forward and not in our way when we try to put the pin in. So now we can just slide the pin in. And we don't really have to worry too much about lining stuff up now because it's all going to fall apart anyway. Then we put a spring seat in. And then we get a spring. And then we get another spring seat. And push that in. So we got it hooked. I try to keep these things in here as we go along. Now we got to put the front shoe on. When we put the equalizing bar in there, and it sits into the notch on the back shoe, and then the anti-rattle spring goes on there towards the front. And now we've got to juggle 3 things. We've got the equalizing bar, the piston for the wheel cylinder, and then on top of all that, we've got the stud at the top. Once you get all 3 things lined up, the equalizing bar, the wheel cylinder, and the stud, like so, then we put the nail in. We're going to find a hole. We'll put the seat in. We'll put the spring in. And we'll put the top part in. And turn it, and we got it locked in. To start putting the retaining springs in place, the first thing we do is put the self-adjuster pulley in place in its hole. We take a spring, we put it in the same hole, take our spring and, oh, almost did it. Take our self-adjuster cable and put it over the stud. Take our installer and put the spring on. So now we have the front spring on, the self-adjuster pulley, and the self-adjuster cable. Now we'll check to make sure that everything is lined up. Now we'll put the rear retainer spring in, and these shoes will pretty much stay in place now. Now I like to bend the ends of the springs so they're equal, parallel, and they're not likely to come off. So see how that's parallel now? And we'll do the same thing to the back one. We take the self-adjuster cable and put it over the self-adjuster cable pulley. We take the self-adjuster lever, engage it in the self-adjuster cable. We take the lever and put it in the hole it belongs in on the shoe. And now this becomes a juggling match. We have to get this return spring in the same hole as the cable without losing it. So here we go. Wish me luck. And there we go, we got it. Now we take the self-adjuster and stick it in there. And pull the shoe apart a little bit to get it to engage. And spread it apart a little bit. Let's put the drum on and see how it fits. Oh, let's turn the axle back. There's a lip on this shoe here, so it may be a little difficult to get this on. Okay. Let's put some lug nuts on. Still turns freely, and that's tight. So let's adjust it up. We'll put our drum retaining screws in, and we'll put little anti-seize on them so that next time we want to take them out, they come out. Next thing we got to do is put this cover on. And I believe this is the last thing. We have to put these dust cover boots in. And I think we're done. I think we have two complete and presentable axles. This is the rear axle, and then we have the front axle. With the axles together, I think we've accomplished our goal. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.